All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our afternoon session of the CoC application process. Had a lovely time this morning going over the renewal. And as most of you know, the renewal is a very different process than writing a new application for HUD funding. So today we're going to spend an hour, maybe an hour and a half, going over the specifics of what you will need to supply the CoC work group by the 30th of August. And hopefully I can answer any questions that may come up or give you some guidance on where you can go to get those answers. So again, if you maybe just joined us, if you go into the chat, I did put the link in there that will take you directly to all the different documents that you'll need for writing the new application. So I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and does everybody see each other? All right. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right on in and bring in the application instructions. All right, so the application instructions, hopefully you're seeing it on the screen. This is going to give you, I think, almost everything you need to be able to follow along the template and to answer the questions that we need answered in order to be able to score your application and then prioritize them based on those scores. So hopefully everyone has gone through this a little bit, but I'm going to just walk through it and then go through the template so you can see how everything is really matched up again so that you can be successful in your application. So last year, the ROCC reinvented all of our CoC application process. And in the new application process, what we wanted to do was give you each a template. And in the template, it's going to have everything that you will need to supply the CoC work group when you submit your package. And so the template itself is basically yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. It's just a way to track, yes, I've done this. Yes, I've answered this question. All right. So as long as you hit the yeses as you go through, then you will hit all the different areas that are required for this application. And then once we go through that, I'm going to show you the scoring process so that you can see how your responses directly go into scoring and how that scoring is made as equitable as we can, or very as more objective as we could get without a lot of subjective scoring. In other words, it's very prescriptive of what we're asking of the people who are going to be reading these reading these applications. All right, so I think what I'm going to do here, I tried this earlier today, and it kind of worked, but kind of didn't work. And I want on this side, this one. All right, so it doesn't work that well. All right, so what I have, I split my screen. Over here to the left is the actual application instructions. And then what I have over here to the right, if I can give it a little bit more room, is the actual template. I don't want to make it too small for you. All right. So again, this should not be new to you if you've already started the process. But essentially, you're always going to start with all this information up here. So your agency name, address, all the contact information that you have that we can contact if needed. All right. So I'm going to start with, get this open a little bit more. I'm just going to open it a lot more. And a lot more. So much more split screen, huh? All right, so anything here in this kind of green is areas that you can enter information into. All right, so once you have all your contact information and your project name, we need to know what your project type is. Okay, so is it a new project? Is it a project for domestic violence? Is it a project related to coordinated entry? Or is it a whole new other project? Okay, so that's going to be the first question that you want to answer so that we know what you're writing for. The next question is really important, and this is going to be a scoring question, giving extra points or an extra point or so for those projects that are going to be serving a county that doesn't have any other services. Let me see if I can say that differently. We want to give credit to those of you who are writing an application that will serve a county that's not currently being served by ROCC projects. So for instance, I know there are some counties over on the West Coast that, from my understanding, may not have a project in our CoC. And so you would say, is this the only CoC project? And you would say yes, all right? And that's going to tell us that you're going to be giving extra point because you are actually serving an underserved county. All right, so that's a really important one to get some of those extra scores. All right, and then of course, this last one here is how much total grant request that you're going to be requesting. How much funds do you want us to put into the application? All right, so let's kind of go down a little bit more. All right, section 1. This is a questions around threshold requirements. Some of these come directly from HUD. We have no choice in the matter. And then some of these are those that the ROCC says we need you to commit to. And if you say no to any one of these 4, you will not meet the threshold to carry on with writing for this grant. Okay, so are you an eligible applicant? Well, you can see here it's nonprofits, state, local governments, and other organizations that are working with state and local government. So I think everyone here fits in that category. So again, it's a yes or no. All right. All right, now if it's an eligible new project, here are 2 ways or 2 selections. One of these has to be true for your project. So is it a permanent supportive housing serving only chronically homeless? Or is it a rapid rehousing serving families, unaccompanied youth, a normal, probably a rapid rehousing project. Okay, so your application needs to be one of those 2 that's coming directly from HUD. The 3rd and 4th, if you haven't, well, actually, I'm going to say for all new applications, you will need to sign that you will have an HMIS agreement saying that you will participate in HMIS and be part of the ROCC and sharing information. And then the second one is that you will sign a coordinated entry agreement saying that you will participate in the ROCC coordinated entry process. Okay, so when you go back to, I think I already brought it down, but when you go into the website, you will see a document that says, here's your Oregon participation agreement with all the information that you'll need to read and sign. And then of course, then you have your coordinated entry agreement that I'll just quickly show you. Simple 1 page. All right. So this will need to be attached to your packet. And I don't want to close everything. Just this one. And if that's true, then of course you're going to say yes and yes. All right. All yeses mean that you have met the threshold. Please carry on with this project. All right. So again, it's really a checklist for you. You're going to have your application proposal, which will be a narrative format. Then we need a draft budget. So don't only just give us your grant amount requested, but give us a budget. What do you think your expenses are? Employees, HMIS costs, administrative expenses. And then in some of these questions, we may ask for supporting documents. So for instance, one of the questions coming up is going to be, prove to us there's a need in your community. And so writing a narrative is one thing, but you might have newspaper articles, or you can run reports on your homelessness, any of that supporting documents, but it will strengthen your narrative. So this is just a checkbox that says, yes, I'm going to add some supporting documents. All right. agency director signs it, your program manager signs it, and then if somebody wrote your application other than you, we would like to know their name also. All right, so scrolling along here, this is where I want to bring back the application itself, or the instructions. All right. So here we are back in our template. I'm going to make it smaller, but I just notice everything over here are yes, no's, yes, and no's. Again, it's just your reminder of you answered these questions. So now I can get rid of that. All right. So let's look at this. So 10 points for this question. Does your project meet and address an unmet need? Determined by utilizing your regional priorities and your own data analysis. And you may be able to document your gaps, and you can, this is one of those where you might be able to add some of your, or you choose to add some of your supplemental documentation. You know, our local community has determined we need housing, more emergency shelters, whatever that is, all right? So answer the question and in a narrative format, and then attach any information that you might want to that shows this information. Now, I do want to say we did not put a word limit on your narrative, but I will say being concise and answering your questions is going to, I don't want to say give you brownie points, because I don't want to say points, but it's much easier for someone who knows nothing about your project to read and just get something clear. All right, so that's just, please be concise, but answer the question. I think it'll do you quite well. Okay, so the next section, the total section we're about to go through will be 45 points of this application. And those 45 points are going to be broken down by short sections. Okay, so the first one is your population served. And here are the 2 questions that we need to have you answer as part of your application. Now, over here in the instructions, what I've tried to do was take the questions we're asking and give a little bit more suggestions on how you would want to respond. So for instance, the first question, define the population to be served and the eligibility requirements for your project. And what is your method for prioritizing them? Over here, I'm saying responses require clear definition of population to be served, eligibility requirements and the method. I mean, it just really redefines the question into a statement, right? So just, you know, the ROCC wanted to make it really easy for you to understand what we're asking for and how you can respond. Now, they're not easy questions, as you see, but the process of what we're doing to help you out, hopefully it'll be very strong and help you get the answers. All right. So there are going to be the 2 questions for your population. And now we have 10 points about your project design. And your project design is basically 5 different questions. Do you need new staff? How are you going to train your staff? Who did you include in developing your project? Give examples of project designs that you've done before. And then the last one is, what relationships do you have already in your community? So again, it's just a general, tell us about your project. What is it you want to do? Who's going to be there? How did you create it? Who's been involved? Who's been at the table? Right? The next section is going to be your outcomes, and it's also going to be for 10 points. Now, the outcomes for your project, if it's a brand new project, you may not have, you know, obviously have your outcomes, but the questions are more of, if you don't have the outcomes, how are you going to show your outcomes in your project? Okay, so not only the first one, you know, how will you help someone who's homeless receive assistance and remain housing in the operating year? And then the next 2 are very, very specific for system performance measures that we have to report to HUD. So we're asking you, what are the outcomes? How are you going to increase employment or financial income? And how are you going to increase non-income sources, such as SNAP benefits, disability benefits that are not income-based, okay? So how is your project going to have those outcomes for 10 points? All right, next one, 3 questions for 5 points. It's all about the housing component. So describe the housing where your participants will reside. How are you going to do outreach to your landlords and property owners? And then how will you, not how will you, but give us an example of some successes that you've had reaching out to landlords or securing housing opportunities. Maybe you talk on the radio station, maybe, whatever that is. Give us some information about how you are part of the community and doing outreach and finding housing for those that you're going to be serving or supporting. All right, next section, policies and procedures. We need to know, we're going to start talking about a little bit more about agency risk. And this is a little bit to start of that, but we want to hear about your project. All right, so what is your experience managing federal grants fiscally and managing federal grants operationally? Okay, so how does your finance department work? And how is your management structure and staffing structure put together to manage the grant? Okay. All right, and then number 3, it's all about the hearth law. And I won't go into the details of what the hearth is, but it's around homelessness. And what we have here is we extracted out components of a hearth policy and procedure. And the reason why we did that is that we know that some of our agencies here aren't going to have a policy and procedure in place around the Hearth Act. All right. So what you do instead is look at some of these bullet points: conflict of interest, homeless person's participation in your project or in your agency, and then fair housing. So these are some examples of those requirements from the Hearth Act that you can respond to on your own without even having a policy and procedure. Okay. Most agencies have a policy and procedure for conflicts. If someone, if one of your participants has a complaint, what is your process? So give us the information, share with us what you have in place. All right, I'm moving on a little bit more. Project readiness. Now we're saying, if you receive these funds, tell us, how long is it going to take to get started? All right. So if you're going to be leasing units, when will it begin? If it's something you need to do around hiring, finding space, tell us what that process is. And then the last one, give us some, reasons that might delay your start date. So I've had experiences with building, new housing, and there was an entire environmental study that took a year and delayed that whole process. So that would be a real, true potential obstacle. But we want to know that going into it. All right. We'll stop. Look in the chat. Doing good. All right. Okay, HMIS participation. All right, so once again, we have organizations who want to apply for funds that may or may not have any, have not entered into an HMIS, the Homeless Management Information System, and we recognize that. So there are 3 different sections related to HMIS. And you only need to answer the questions within those sections, all right? So for instance, if your agency does not use HMIS, which is perfectly fine, then answer these 4 questions, right? So if you don't use it, who will be responsible for using it? How will you use the data? How will you manage your data quality improvement? And give some examples. Give some examples of how you have already used data, and client and project data, in the work that you do. Okay, so this is allowing you to say, we do use data, and here's how we use it. But we will have someone who will be responsible for HMIS because that is a requirement, as you know, in any of this funding. Okay. The second section is I am using a compatible HMIS database, but it's not Service Point. I don't think anyone here, I doubt anyone here is using an HMIS. I really don't think anyone else is using a different HMIS than Service Point. But say you were, you were using something. I wish I could think of an example of that. Then you would answer these 4 questions, which is basically, how is it compatible and how are you going to bridge the two? Okay, how are you going to merge with HMIS? And then, of course, many of you here already use Service Point. So tell us how you're using it, how you're using it to determine some of your projects are effective, and then what do you do for data quality improvement? All right. So HMIS, 10 points, really hone in those areas that are true for you. Okay, recognizing that all 3 of these options are available. All right. Past performance for 15 points. All right. So this is really, if we want to get to the nut of this, is like, for some of you, you have a similar project, you have a rapid rehousing project, or you run a shelter, and you want another project that's very similar, right? So you want to give us past performance about how well you did in that project. That makes total sense, right? Some of you, this is a new project, and it's because it's new, you don't have an exact replica with success. But what success do you have? All right, so find some story, find data, something in your organization that you've already done, and use these questions to describe your success or your challenges, okay? So it doesn't have to be the same project, just show us that you've had, you have some past performance data, right? So it includes some here about funding. If you had a grant to do a small project, tell us what that funding was, and if it was spent, all right? Because if you get these dollars, we want to make sure you're spending every penny of it, all right? So past performance. All right, I mentioned it earlier, we want to talk about agency risk. I think most of you know that, if you get a $100,000 grant, we want to make sure, the ROCC wants to make sure that your agency is strong, fiscally strong, able to manage large grants or have support. Maybe you haven't done it, but you have some support in doing it. Okay, so these questions really dig into, tell us about your agency. Tell us your financial procedure for managing grants. What are the qualifications and experience at those different levels? Have you handled any grants similar in size in the past 5 years? Yes or no? If you say no, it's okay. Just explain it. Explain it to us. Audit findings. And then we still have this question in here about COVID. I think we decided to leave this in here, knowing that COVID obviously is different than last year, but we're still interested. So if we have a crisis, give us an example of how you addressed it in the past so that we know that should something happen, we hope not, that you've had the practice and the skill in helping us alleviate more difficulties for those that we're assisting. All right, 10 points. All right, this comes from HUD. So alignment with CoC priorities. So they're not the ROCC's priorities, they're HUD priorities, okay? And they're system performance measures. So if you've been in any of my meetings in the past, I always talk about system performance measures. Do you have any information from your data showing length of time persons have been homeless, any of those individuals who exited to permanent housing? How about the number of homeless persons? How about income growth? Maybe persons who are homeless the first time. All right, so those are the system performance measures. But then also, What about successful placement from street outreach, right? And successful placement could be from street outreach to an emergency shelter. That's a success, all right? And then, of course, placement into a retention or permanent housing, excuse me, permanent housing, all right? If you want, you can always go out to the HUD website, look at CoC priorities. There may be others that aren't here that might be more applicable to you. So feel free to look at CoC priorities and write what's true for your organization and some of the projects that you've worked with in the past. Excuse me. All right, the second question here is really a commitment to you. And that is, well, actually it's a commitment to ROCC. Have you been attending meetings, attending trainings, decided to become part of a membership committee, or do you have plans to do so? Okay. All ROCC agencies receiving CoC funding have to participate in ROCC activities. So if you're doing it, tell us. If there are areas you're not and you would like to, or you know you're going to, tell us that also. Right? The last big one here is alignment with coordinated entry standards, 10 points. Here's another one that comes directly from HUD. It's not from ROCC, it's from HUD. And I pulled here a few of the bullet points from HUD that are related to coordinated entry standards, right? So you may not be using coordinated entry right now. That's okay. How have you prioritized people? How have you lowered some barriers for people to enter into your program? If you do have a housing, you know, do you have a housing first orientation? Do you know what housing first means? Obviously, fair and equal access, a standardized assessment. If you're not using coordinated entry, do you have an assessment you're already using for your current programs? And of course, inclusiveness and some other bullet points there. Okay, so again, you may not be in HMIS, you may not be coordinated entry, but you probably have information that fits into some of these categories. Okay, really wanted to keep it open for your narrative to say, we haven't done it, but we have done these components of it. All right. Now let's look at vulnerability. Vulnerability is for bonus points. If your population is going to serve chronically homeless, are those with disabilities, families with children, unaccompanied youth, those who are coming from a place not meant for habitation or fleeing domestic violence, you would say your usual yes or no's, all right? And each one of those yeses will add bonus points to your total score, okay? So any questions about the application checklist? I want to emphasize again, everything I went through is in much more detail in the instruction document that you should also have. Okay. So now I'm going to shift over. So I want to show you how it's going to be scored. And I think you'll see that it's going to be scored like exactly how we're asking you to write it. Okay, so we're going to be giving these new applications to people who are not part of the ROCC or not part of those who are receiving CoC funds. We're really looking for outside non-associated people, you know, with the ROCC, who can look at these with fresh eyes. Okay. The scoring has been set up as best as we can, so it's not a subjective scoring process. So it's not, I like this, I like this. It is, have you answered it? Have you answered it? Have you answered it? Okay. We'll probably have 2 or 3 readers read every application. So your application is going to be read by 2, 3 or more readers who will be doing a scoring individually. And then we come together, the 3 or 4, and we talk through everyone's scoring and come up with a final scoring for your application that the 4 or 3 grant readers agree to. All right, so completely separate reading, completely separate scoring, and then we come together and finalize the scoring for your grant. All right, so you'll see up here, you're going to say what kind of project it is. We already talked about that. Is it permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, domestic violence? Only CoC, you know, it's going to be yes or no. We talked about that. You'll get an extra point. If it's no, actually, if it's no, you get a minus point. It's the way it calculates. All right. Now your reader's going to come in here and say, all right, they have their application. Yes, they agreed. Yes, it's going to fit into the definitions. They did give us the HMIS agreement. They gave us the agreement for coordinated entry. Threshold passes. They can continue. If one of these is no, application is not eligible, the reader stops, will not move forward. Okay, so make sure you can say yes to all these so you don't waste time if the reader comes and says, I don't have everything we need. All right. All right. So now the scoring part. Every question that you answer has a response of 1, 2, 3, or 4. Okay. 1 being, you didn't answer anything relevant to this question. You don't understand this question. You did not answer this question. I doubt that's going to happen with anyone here. But if that's true and the reader says, does this meet or address an unmet need? And here's a little hint for them. They can, you can use data, kind of giving some examples of what you can use as backup. Want it to be easy for the reader. And they're going to say 1, 2, 3, or 4. Okay, so clearly responds to most of it. Could be a little bit better, but it was pretty good. So there's your 3. All right, so out of 10 points, this you're getting 7.5 points. Right, and then of course the reviewer can write some comments that will be helpful when we come together as a ranking team. As a scoring team, to talk through why did you give a 3? Why did you give a 4? And we talk through it for your final score. Okay. But I wanted to show you this because I want you to see that the work you do, the hard work that you do in answering those questions, we're making it somewhat hard for the reader also because they're going to go out there. There's the question you've been asked. It's exactly the question. Okay. And they're going to read it. And if it's 100% and it's beautiful, there's your 4. And there's your 4. And there's your 10 points. Okay. Same thing. Your questions, however you respond, your grant reader is going to respond based on how well they believe or they think you answered the question. Okay. So there's going to be a little bit of subjective, but you can only answer the 1, 2, 3, 4. And if there's something less than a 4 or a 3, or there's a disagreement across the 3 readers, everyone's going to have to justify their score. All right. So we really want to make this fair and equitable across the board. Okay. Same 3 people will read all your applications. That makes sense. Okay. Anyway, so it's really that way, all the way down. Read it, score it based on 1 to 4, add comments in case it comes up in the scoring committee. There's your 10 points. Depending on how you answer, you get your 10 points. And just like with you, they have reminders. If there's something missing, got to go back and make sure I answer. But every question you're being asked, they also will be using a 1.4 scale. Okay, HMIS, same thing. How you answered, all the way down. There's what you're going to be spending, your risk questions. There's your CoC priorities. coordinated entry standards. You're going to get your total points calculated, and then your bonus points. So if you're going to be serving and you answer yes, you will be getting a point for each one of these categories that's answered yes, for a total of 5 points. So there's 6 here, but the total for this would only be 5 points. So if you say yes to all of them, you'll get 5 points. Okay. And then of course, your total for the application, your total points, you're going to get your total 100%, what the one grant reader has for your application. Okay. Another thing I want to show you real quick, because I want the grant writer, the grant reader to be accountable to reading your application and doing it correctly, is if you notice down here, there's some highlights that say, oh, reader, you need to go back and look at line 92 because it's missing a total amount. Or, uh-oh, HMIS participation, there's an error here. Only one answer can be true. So not only are you having your checklist, but we're saying, okay, reader, here's the checks and balances, and you might have missed something. So you need to go back, please, and make sure that you've done your part to get the best scoring that we can give you for your application. And then finally, your reader can give final comments. And as I said, we'll have 2 or 3 people reading every application. And those same 2 or 3 people will meet and we'll talk about your application, taking their scoring sheets and agreeing on every question and what that final score will be. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna stop. And that was much easier than the renewal, which is very surprising in a presentation. But now, what questions do you have? Bring them on. Did it make sense? Is it pretty straightforward? Is there an area that you think you might need assistance in, or you would like a little bit more thought in what that area would be? Okay. All right, so I'm going to kind of conclude in just a moment. Still, if you have questions, please bring them up now, because what Nora and I are planning to do is any questions, probably after today, they're going to go into the ROCC@caporegon.org email. And we will post every question and our answer so everyone can see, okay? Because we want to, your question might be the same as another person's question and vice versa. Rather than Nora and I answering the same question, we're just going to do the usual Q&A. You send us a question, we're going to post the answer, all right? So I'm suggesting that if you have a question now, you might want to bring it up. And if not, think about using that ROCC email address for those questions that will come up in the next few weeks. Next 2 weeks. It's a 2-week turnaround. We may have office hours where some of us will just be on for an hour and you can come ask general questions. So that's probably going to be scheduled very soon. Anything else, Nora?
I don't think so. I think if no one has any questions, like you said, just send them to the ROCC email and we'll get back to you, and then also post them on the website. But also, if you are not on the ROCC listserv, if someone is forwarding you emails from us, also send an email to that ROCC@caporegon.org email and we'll get you on the listserv so you can get updates from us. But we post everything on our website. So if you have questions or kind of confused, just hop on there and see if there's any resources. But I think that's it if we don't have any other questions.
Yeah, and I'll put out here that some of you may know about and be interested in the supplemental NOFO. The supplemental NOFO, if you're not aware of it, is a special 3-year grant from HUD specifically targeting rural communities. All right, so yay HUD for recognizing rural communities are different than non-rural communities. So it's very applicable to everyone around my screen here, right? Nora and I will be sending out information about how to apply. I think we're going to go ahead and open that up also. And it's going to have special guidelines. It's going to have different questions because it's very specific, like it's very specific to your community, right? It's due October the 20th. So we have more time. So we definitely need to get this one we're talking about today moving along. And then we'll come back and say, okay, now if you're interested, here's the information, here's how to apply. Still a rating and ranking process, but I think you'll find it's easier. And it's really targeted to your community. I really want to know about your community, you know, where people are residing. Is it a special unserved population? So I see Kirsten here, you know, looks like, you know, supporting, I mean, she's the head office of Native American programs. I think that's actually written in the supplemental as a priority. All right. So I suggest you go to our website, find the supplemental information, and, you know, sometime in the next week or so, you'll hear from probably Nora about the opening of the new supplemental rural funding grant application.
Oh, one last thing that I forgot. If you have not submitted your intent to apply for the regular CoC application, I just put that link in the chat. It is due tomorrow at 5 p.m. I will send another reminder email out in the morning, but if you haven't filled that out, do that as soon as possible.
Yeah, and even if you don't end up doing it, or you're even thinking about doing it, you're not sure, just do the intent to apply. It doesn't mean you will apply, right? It's just saying I want to be on that list. So we know what we're looking for or expecting and how many grant readers we need. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to stop recording.